April 2nd, 2025, a day historians will mark as the beginning of a seismic shift in global power. It started with a pipeline, it escalated with a tariff, and it exploded into an oil alliance that stunned the world. Canada and China, two nations with very different histories, just struck a deal that redefines energy, economics, and influence. And in the middle of it all is the United States, scrambling, sidelined, and stunned. But this isn't just about oil. This is a chess game of geopolitics, a realignment of global alliances, and a story of ambition, strategy, and sovereignty. Let's unpack what really happened, because this is more than a headline. This is a story about how one deal might reshape the balance of power on the planet. Voice team? A pipeline years in the making. For more than a decade, Canada's oil industry operated under a silent constraint, abundant in resources yet bottlenecked by geography and bureaucracy. Trapped in the heartland of Alberta, the country's oil producers found themselves dependent on a single buyer, the United States. It wasn't just a trade relationship, it was a chokehold. Over 98% of Canada's crude exports flowed south, funneled into US refineries, and sold at a discount simply because there was nowhere else for it to go. That's where the Trans Mountain expansion came in, not as just a pipeline, but as a promise. A promise that Canada could finally take control of its own energy destiny. Originally pitched in 2013 at a cost of $7.4 billion, TMX became one of the most ambitious and controversial infrastructure projects in Canadian history. Lawsuits erupted, particularly from Indigenous communities who challenged the lack of meaningful consultation. Environmentalists raised alarms over spill risks, especially near the ecologically rich Salish Sea. Political resistance, regulatory hurdles, and public outcry stretched the timeline from years to decades, and as the legal battles mounted, so did the cost, ballooning to a staggering $34 billion. But in May 2024, against all odds, the oil finally began to flow. 890,000 barrels a day, nearly triple the pipeline's previous capacity, pushed westward toward British Columbia. That's enough oil to fill 50 Olympic-sized swimming pools every single day. And unlike before, this crude wasn't just destined for the Gulf Coast. It was headed across the Pacific, to Asia, to China. Canada had built more than a pipeline. It had constructed a gateway to global markets. And with the first tanker setting sail, a new message reverberated through the international energy world. We're done being the junior partner. We're not just an exporter, we're a player. And just as Canada stood ready to claim its new role, a familiar global power had already taken notice and was preparing to make its move. And just as Canada opened the tap to the Pacific, the world's most strategic energy player was already in position to catch the flow. The Chinese masterstroke. China didn't merely observe the momentous activation of the Trans Mountain expansion, it executed. Like a chess grandmaster anticipating every move before it's made, Beijing played its hand with quiet precision. While political pundits debated the pipeline's implications, China was already securing its future. In early 2025, Rongsheng Petrochemical, one of China's largest and most sophisticated refining giants, opened an inconspicuous yet highly strategic outpost in downtown Calgary. Nestled in the heart of Alberta's oil capital, this wasn't a symbolic gesture, it was a base of operations with a singular purpose: to lock down supply. Rongsheng's appetite is enormous, 800,000 barrels of heavy crude a day, and Canada's oil sands, with their dense, sulfur-rich composition, match the demands of China's complex refineries like a key in a vault. By June 2025, just weeks after TMX came online, the first domino fell. Rongsheng struck a multi-year agreement with Suncor Energy, one of Canada's most prominent producers. The deal, 200,000 barrels per month, but the terms were what really turned heads. In practical terms, this meant China didn't just buy oil, they bought control. As soon as the oil was loaded onto a tanker, it was theirs. Rongsheng could divert shipments in real time to Japan, India, or wherever market dynamics made the deal sweeter. This flexibility meant they could reap arbitrage profits of $2 to $3 per barrel, all while bypassing traditional middlemen. But here's the part that made this more than a savvy trade. It was a signal. This wasn't just a purchase, it was a power move. And Canada, it didn't blink. In fact, they leaned in. Sources began confirming that Rongsheng wasn't stopping with Suncor. Talks were already underway with Cenovus Energy and Canadian Natural Resources Limited. Even multinational giants like BP and Shell, with stakes in Alberta's oil sands, were being courted. If these deals are finalized, as much as 10% of TMX's total capacity could be under Chinese control by 2026. That's when alarm bells rang in Washington. What looked like a quiet trade maneuver had suddenly evolved into something far more potent, a geopolitical shift disguised as a crude contract. And for the first time in a long time, the US wasn't in the driver's seat. But here's the question that sent ripples across boardrooms and situation rooms from Calgary to Beijing to Washington. How long would the United States sit still while China carved out a new energy axis in its own backyard? Trump's tariff shockwave. The answer came fast and loud. In a fiery press conference that echoed his trademark rhetoric, Donald Trump, now deep into a dramatic political resurgence, dropped a bombshell on the global energy market, a 10% tariff on Canadian oil and gas. He framed it as a bold step to protect American energy independence, a move to bolster domestic producers. But to insiders, it was more than a policy shift. It was a provocation, a blunt force response to Canada's growing willingness to do business with Beijing. Ottawa reeled. The shockwaves were immediate. Canadian oil producers scrambled to assess the fallout. Projected losses of $10 billion annually loomed large. The tariff didn't just hit profits, it hit trust. For decades, the US had been Canada's primary buyer, its closest ally. Now it was imposing penalties like an economic adversary. South of the border, panic spread among refiners. American facilities processed nearly 4 million barrels of Canadian crude daily. That lifeline was now burdened with added costs, and it didn't take long for the public to feel the sting. Gasoline prices in the US surged, 80 cents per gallon, according to analysts at Goldman Sachs. Politicians scrambled to deflect blame. Truckers protested. Consumers complained. The third rail of American politics, pain at the pump, had been electrified. But while Washington fumbled, something unexpected happened. Instead of folding, Canada doubled down. The tariff, ironically, had the opposite effect of what Trump intended. It didn't intimidate, it activated. It poured gasoline on Canada's efforts to diversify its energy partnerships. And there was one country more than ready to step into the vacuum. China stepped in again. Rongsheng didn't pause. It accelerated, the trade routes widened, new deals were inked faster. TMX tankers left port with renewed urgency. The message was clear. If the US wanted to play hardball, Canada had found a new teammate. And that's when the world realized we weren't just watching a trade dispute, we were witnessing the birth of a new global energy order. Chapter 4: A New Energy Axis. This isn't just about barrels of oil. This is the quiet formation of a new energy axis, one that is redrawing the geopolitical map in real time. With the Trans Mountain expansion now fully operational and crude already sailing west, Canada has initiated its long-awaited energy pivot, but oil is just the beginning. Coming up fast on the global stage is LNG Canada, a $40 billion natural gas behemoth set to launch by the end of 2025. Together, these two projects signal a radical transformation. For generations, Canada played the role of loyal supplier to the United States. Its pipelines flowed south, its prices were dictated in Houston, and its energy diplomacy rarely extended beyond the North American neighborhood. That era is ending. Now Canada has its eyes firmly fixed on Asia, a region with a $15 trillion energy appetite and a hunger for stability in a world of volatility. For China, this is more than just a win at the pump. It's about energy security, long-term, predictable, and far from the volatile choke points of the Middle East. TMX gives Beijing access to oil that is not just heavy and compatible with their refineries, but sourced from a politically stable democratic partner. And for Canada, this is leverage like it's never had before. No longer bound to a single buyer, Canada is positioning itself as a true global player, negotiating not out of necessity, but out of strategy. Rongsheng's oil deal was merely the opening move. The next, liquefied natural gas. Pro-China, another major player with deep roots in Beijing, holds a 15% stake in LNG Canada. This project is poised to export 14 million tons of natural gas each year directly to Asia. And that's not a sideline plan, it's the main act. Together, TMX and LNG Canada don't just represent infrastructure, they are the spine of a new energy axis, one that connects the resource-rich fields of Alberta to the industrial engines of East Asia. And for the first time in decades, Canada isn't following the global energy order, it's helping shape it. The fallout in Washington. Washington is scrambling. The 10% tariff that was meant to rein Canada in to remind them of their place in the North American energy hierarchy has done something entirely different. It's backfired badly. Instead of bending to US pressure, Canada leaned harder into diversification, faster, bolder. The tariff didn't slow Canadian exports. It supercharged their pivot to Asia. While tankers now chart new courses across the Pacific, American energy executives are waking up to a troubling new reality. US refineries, long dependent on the predictability and affordability of Canadian crude, are staring down a supply gap. Nearly 4 million barrels a day flowed across the border before the rift. Now, those barrels are in play, and replacing them? That's a logistical and political nightmare. Venezuelan oil, sanctioned, unpredictable, and tied to one of the most unstable regimes in the Western Hemisphere. Saudi crude, expensive, geopolitically complex, and increasingly focused on pivoting to Asia themselves. And suddenly, a new narrative is emerging, one that cuts deeper than economics. America didn't just lose a trading partner, it may have pushed its closest ally straight into China's embrace. Energy analysts aren't mincing words. Many are calling this the most significant North American energy realignment in over half a century. Not since the 1973 oil crisis has the continent faced a disruption of this magnitude. The balance of power is no longer what it was. And only now, months after the first tanker left Burnaby, and days after Chinese execs toasted new contracts in Calgary, has Washington truly woken up to the implications. This isn't just a supply issue, it's a strategic blunder. And in the halls of power, there's a growing realization the US might be paying the price for underestimating Canada and for ignoring China's patience. Sovereignty or sabotage? But not everyone sees Canada's energy pivot as a triumph. For some, it's a gamble. For others, a betrayal. As oil tankers chart new paths toward Asian markets, resistance is rising back home. Environmental groups have reignited protests, pointing to the very real risk of ecological disaster. One major spill in the Salish Sea could devastate one of the richest marine ecosystems on the planet. And while the government has set aside $1.5 billion for spill response, critics argue that no amount of money can reverse the kind of damage TMX could cause if something goes wrong. Then there's the matter of consultation, or the lack of it. The Sililwida, or Talail Waututh Nation, whose ancestral waters lie directly in the path of TMX, continue to challenge the project in court. For them, this isn't just about climate or commerce, it's about sovereignty. Their voices, they argue, were overlooked, their concerns minimized. To them, this pipeline represents not independence, but a continuation of colonial erasure. And yet, on the other side of the debate, voices are rising in full-throated support of what they call energy sovereignty. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, in a high-profile address last fall, called Canada's new global posture a turning point, a $500 billion opportunity by 2035, powered not just by oil, but by natural gas and hydro. Her message: Canada is finally taking control of its economic future, unshackling itself from US dependence, and building a diversified portfolio of partners. Prime Minister Trudeau, meanwhile, unveiled a $6.5 billion global markets accelerator plan, with $5 billion earmarked specifically for helping energy exporters expand in Asia and $1 billion set aside for farmers hit by US trade friction. The urgency of this strategy? It came just weeks after Trump's tariff threats. And this push isn't limited to the West. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre wants to revive the once-dead Energy East pipeline, opening the door to exports through Atlantic ports. There's even talk of Arctic LNG routes connecting Canada to Germany, a bold move in a post-Russia Europe desperate for stable suppliers. So, is this sovereignty, or is it short-term strategy wrapped in long-term risk? That depends on who you ask, but one thing is certain: Canada is no longer just responding to global events, it's provoking them. The global ripple effect. This wasn't just a deal, it was a detonation, one that sent shockwaves across the global energy landscape. With a single agreement, China secured a reliable, long-term source of crude from a politically stable democracy. No more relying solely on volatile suppliers in the Middle East. No more vulnerability to choke points like the Strait of Hormuz. For Beijing, this was not just energy, it was insurance. For Canada, it was a moment of economic clarity. After decades of sending the vast majority of its oil to one customer, it had found the exit door. And not just an exit, but a pivot point. Diversification wasn't just a buzzword anymore. It was happening. With TMX flowing west and LNG Canada preparing to launch, Canada was stepping into the global spotlight as a multi-market energy powerhouse. Meanwhile, the United States was caught flat-footed. Its most trusted energy partner was now building tighter ties with its biggest strategic rival. American refineries braced for higher costs. Analysts at Wood Mackenzie warned they could face price hikes of $5 to $10 per barrel. The diplomatic strain deepened. What had once been a quiet, reliable trade partnership had morphed into a tense, unpredictable equation. And over in Europe, they were watching closely. Still navigating an energy crisis in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, European nations saw opportunity in Canada's rise. With LNG Canada on the brink and Arctic shipping lanes being eyed for expansion, many are now wondering, could Canada become Europe's next LNG lifeline? The implications don't stop at oil and gas. Hydro-Quebec and Ontario Power Generation are already exporting billions in clean electricity to the US, and that figure is only expected to grow. Canada is no longer America's energy sidekick. It's a sovereign force, a rising titan with its gaze fixed firmly across the Pacific. And the world is adjusting to a future where Canada isn't just present in the global energy game, it's playing to win.